Quotation from myself, segment 21, quotation number 2 to 5. In the same way we speak about universal grammar as fundamental substructure underlying all world languages, we can also say that there is such thing as a universal religious grammar underlying all world religions, namely the sum total of the basic principles governing the essential relationship between the sacred and profane, body and spirit, God and man, etc. We can also extend this analogy between language and religion a little bit further. In the same way as the distinct languages, while sharing the common universal grammar, differ sometimes drastically in their particular grammars, vocabularies, and methods of writing, the different religions, despite their shared universal religious grammar, vary greatly in the specific theology, number and functions of God, ethical teaching, rituals, taboos, etc. But while it is impossible to give a reason, though many have tried, for each distinct language being what it is, namely having a distinct grammar, vocabulary, and writing, the connection between religion of particular group, tribe, nation, etc., in their life is much easier to discern. And since men have no other materials but the surrounding them reality from which to build their myths and religions, when looked upon objectively, most of religious laws, rituals, taboos, etc. can be traced back to what were originally very important and practical everyday activities. Later, when the progress made them no longer necessary in a strict pragmatic sense, those activities, by now traditional, have been ritualized into sacred ceremony, symbolizing the metaphorical meaning of the originally down-to-earth activities and the process transforming the mundane into the sacred. These activities, notwithstanding some basic similarities, admittedly vary from religion to religion depending on a peculiar to each locality set of conditions. And if we accept that religion is a ritualistically symbolic, spiritually mystical, metaphorical expression of a socio-economic, cultural, historical, and psychological experience of a particular nation group, then we can make the next step and connect each particular religion with its particular original creator, the specific nation, using the word nation not in the modern political sense, but more in tribal ethnic one. Seen in this light, every religion reflects history and character of its original creator, as, for example, Judaism of ancient Hebrews, Buddhism, Hindus, Islam of Arabs, Christianity of Hellenized Jews and Greek, and so on. Then, as always, there are those who invent and those who imitate and use what has been invented by somebody else. This rule is applicable to such invention as religion too. For beside the original creator of indigenous religion, there are other nations, let's call them users, who adopt these foreign religions either voluntarily or under pressure. Thus, for example, Buddhism, originated in India, has been adopted by the Chinese, Vietnamese, Tibetans, etc. Islam, originated in Arabia, was adopted by the Turks, Persian, Indonesian, etc. Christianity was adopted by the Romans, Germans, Slavs, etc. But those who embrace somebody else's religion never adopt it in its pure original form. It always undergoes more or less drastic transformation while being digested by the national character of the recipients, until it eventually becomes, by mixing local myth and folklore with the original theology and rituals, a truly national religion. That is why there is a Chinese Buddhism, different from a Hindu Buddhism, which is different from Tibetan Buddhism, which is different from Japanese Buddhism, and so on and so forth. Similarly, both Christianity and Islam have undergone national changes, so that the Russian Christian, for example, is as different from Italian one as Turkish Muslim from his Indonesian co-religionist. At the same time as religion have been set apart by the national differences, they have also been split along the denominational lines, which sometimes but not always coincide with the national ones. These show that even within one national religion, there are different groups which have to further subdivide the already divided and transformed religion in order to assimilate it into their own peculiar fashion to fulfill their specific needs. Of course, not all indigenous religions are portable. In order to be digestible by the foreign users, they, like Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism, have to emphasize the primacy of the universal over the particular and to promote the unity of men instead of dividing them. Their theology, in order to have the broadest possible appeal, ought to be sufficiently vague and abstract and consequently flexible enough to allow many different, sometimes even contradictory interpretations without destroying the basic tenets of the creed. Number 2 to 6. The reason we often experience disappointment and nagging emptiness after our dreams has been finally materialized is that they probably were not our dreams after all, but have been borrowed from somebody else, our parents, friend, or society in general. For there are always a lot of such ready-made for mass consumption dreams floating around, and it is not easy to resist the temptation to pick up the most popular and or the most accessible ones without giving too much thought to it. In addition, it has to be acknowledged, it is equally hard to choose among them those that might suit us best. But the hardest thing, of course, is to create in a crucible of our own imagination our own dreams. Yet it is absolutely necessary, though not sufficient, if we are to avoid the disappointments of the even fulfilled dreams, or, which is more important, the disillusionment of the unfulfilled life. Number 2 to 7. As the young children, and one can extend by analogy what follows to the early civilization as well, we live in a very small world of which we consider ourselves, with various degree of awareness and certainty, to be a center, and not simply a center, but the one which occupies disproportionately large part of this small world of ours. Then as we grow, our knowledge about the world around us gradually increases, its boundary expands, and it became correspondingly bigger. And the older we get, the more we know, and the more we know, the larger the outside world seems to us. But the larger the world outside us becomes, the smaller we feel, progressively occupying less and less space in a bigger and bigger world, which in turn compel us to continuously reassess and consequently scale down the importance of ourselves in the general scheme of things. Yet, as the years go by, it is getting harder and harder to carry the increasingly unbearable burden of one's own insignificance. Some, hopefully the majority, accept this with a stoic resignation. Others, unable to cope with the ruthless process of the inevitable diminution of the self, revolt against it by creating and subsequently beginning themselves to believe, and even worse, forcing the others to accept it as real, the myth of their highly exaggerated eminence and importance. If successful in maintaining this myth, they can make themselves reasonably happy. But if not, they become the most miserable of all, and in addition, make the life of those close to them miserable too. 228. Suddenly occurred to me that my whole life has been probably one perpetual struggle against the overwhelming totality of banality. By now, after the countless defeats have left me bruised and scarred for life, I know that I can't win this futile war. But neither can I stop fighting, and if something outside me, almost against my will, is prodding me to carry it on seemingly forever. 229. When more pours out his soul into one's writing, does one become as empty as the vessels from which contents has been completely drained? For the more I write, the more I'm beginning to catch myself while speaking with saying again and again what I have already written. But even worse, I find myself constantly comparing, perhaps half-consciously, what I have written before with what, when speaking now, I'm saying. And to my dismay, I often find the latter to be somewhat wanting, that is, to be poorly phrased, more or less confused, and always incomplete, all the while forgetting that the perfection of the written, as compared with the spoken word, is, more often than not, a product of long deliberation, self-editing, and laborious search for a better word and better, if not the best sentence, which is, of course, impossible during the normal, most spontaneous conversation.